Hey guys, welcome back to Hypnovision. Today I want to discuss with everyone out there why I chose celibacy, the practice of semen retention, some of the personal lessons that it taught me, but most importantly, what it can do for you in your own life, even if you have a partner or you don't have a partner. Today's video is not really about the practice itself, but what it revealed to me revolving around the larger narration of religion itself. Specifically, I found that there were many truths spread out across many different religions. And when you start to look at the symbolism behind many different religions, you start to understand a very different story. And for me, when I looked at the Catholics, for example, and modern Christianity, like Baptist or Southern Baptist, or the type of Christianity we have in the United States, I started to see something that honestly felt very deeply disturbing. I felt very deeply betrayed. If you've ever been hurt by somebody in a church or of a faith, then you would understand the very deep betrayal that one probably would face after leaving the belief system. And yes, there have been many people over the years who leave different religions and they refer to it as a cult. So with that said, I want to point out some of the similarities that I found, but one of the most surprising things was the electrical component that was hidden in plain sight but was compartmentalized. If you go online and you start to look up sun worship and the Vatican, you will start to find all kinds of strange imagery of the Pope and the staff with the sun on it. You will also find throughout history many versions of Jesus with a sun disk behind his head. And Jesus is known as the Son of God. So that was one of the biggest senses of betrayal when I finally learned that firsthand. Now, you can go around and try to make people aware of things. You can try to get their attention and get people to see things. But if they are in this sense of denial, sense of rejection, sense of, I don't want to hear that because it's not of my religion, so I'm not willing to listen, but I want you to hear my point of view. So there is oftentimes this sense of rumination or argumentative mindsets of, trying to force your belief onto someone else. So I think everybody does come to that point in their own life at various points where you have to go with what you feel in your gut and feel in your heart as the truth for you. So for me, when I started to see the symbolism between the sun worship, the sun above, and the connection of the sunlight being an electromagnetic energy source, and the Catholics and the link of cathodes, it was like a light bulb going off for me, and that was a moment of feeling a very deep betrayal because you would think that family and friends would be the first people that you could talk to about these things. And as it turns out, that's not always the case. In fact, they are probably the ones that are going to outcast you faster than anyone else because now you are questioning things that are outside of comfort zones, outside of the box, and definitely something that is taboo to talk about. So, with that said, guys, I want to read a few things to you that help me to understand this because light language and the forgotten current. Most people are taught to believe that words are just labels. That language is neutral, that meaning is fixed. But if we slow down and we listen closely, you start to notice something else happening beneath the surface. Because language doesn't just describe reality, it shapes how we experience it. The moment, and take a moment and think about the word Catholic. We're told it means universal, a faith meant for everyone, a single source of truth. But the root of the word comes from something much older. It comes from Greek, kathodos, the way down, a descent. Now, pause here for just a minute because the same root word shows up in a very different place, not in church, but in physics. The cathode, an electrical system, the cathode is the source, the place where energy begins to move, where the invisible potential becomes visible current. It's the point of emission. Light doesn't just disappear, it travels. And suddenly the metaphor changes. What once described energy flowing into form later describes authority flowing into hierarchy. Not wrong, just reframed. Now let's move somewhere even older, before Christianity, before doctrine, and before institutions. Human beings orientated their lives around one thing above all else, and that was the sun. Not as a god in the modern sense, but as life itself. The sun regulated time, seasons, growth, and survival. It rose, it fell, it disappeared, and it returned. Death and resurrection every single day. So when early Christianity emerged, it didn't invent its symbols, it inherited them. Light of the world, the halo, December 25th, the return after darkness. But listen carefully to what changed. The Son of God, the visible, external, cosmic source, became the Son of God. Now, if you didn't see the spelling, it sounds the same, doesn't it? Same sound, different center. Power moved from the sky to a story, from nature to narrative. So we took the power from nature and we put it into a narrative and called it religion. And translation always loses something. That is the law of thermodynamics. Now let's talk about magnetism without the mysticism aspect of it. Every living body is electrical. Your brain communicates through voltage. Your heart generates a measurable electromagnetic field. Your nervous system responds to charge, polarity, and rhythm. Attraction isn't poetic language, it's physics. Balance isn't spiritual fluff, it's regulation. Early mystics didn't have instruments, they had attention. They felt what we now measure. So when ancient texts spoke of light, spirit, breath, vibration, and alignment, they weren't escaping reality, they were describing it from the inside. Over time, experience became doctrine, embodiment became belief, and belief became obedience. Not because someone was hiding the truth. Empires don't run well on inner knowing. They run on structure, rules, certainty, yet the quiet line remains. The kingdom of heaven is within you, not as poultry, but as a clue. Because when the electrical system balances, noise drops. When polarity harmonizes, coherence appears. And coherence feels like peace, clarity, and presence. So maybe this story isn't about religion versus science or God versus man. Maybe it's about language versus the experience. That you are not separate from the lights, not separate from magnetism, not separate from the current that animates your body. You don't need to reject belief to see this. You just need to notice. I chose to become celibate for a very reason of understanding these things because, I've said this before in camera that my experience with religion, generally speaking, is it doesn't teach about sexual energy and it doesn't teach about like the mother, right? Because most Western Christianity is all about God, the Son of God. They call the Father the Son. There is, we have stories of Mary, but it's primarily about Jesus. The whole thing has been centered around Jesus. The narration has been centered around him sacrificing his life for me, for you, for other people. So there is, in the narration, when you look at being an author and writing stories, then you understand the archetypes and the story arcs within stories. And there's just a lot there that it was hard for me to accept as truth, especially when I saw the parallels of the sunlight above, and I started to understand the parallels of electromagnetism. There is an unseen force that comes with magnetism. And, if you were naive, if you weren't taught any better, if no one ever showed you, then those unseen forces could trick your sensory input. And you might even say that it's a spirit, it's a demon, it's a devil, it's all kinds of things affecting you. The devil's out to get you. But the truth of the matter is, a mind that is idle becomes the devil's playground. And it's not meaning like there's a little red man in your head. That just means that an idle mind is sitting still, burning energy, and it's not being productive. It's not being purposeful. You become stuck in your head. You become stuck in your imagination and in fantasy. And when we get into these type things, energy still wants to move. So I chose celibacy because when else am I going to experience it in my life? If I hadn't done it by now, then would I ever experience it? We only get a limited amount of time here. So that was one of the biggest reasons. But the cathode, right? And then looking at um, Islam, for example, and Mecca and the black box and the connection to Saturn, and how all three of our major Abrahamic religions tie back to Saturn and worship of the black cube. And when you look at the black cube, you see a magnet, you see the field, you see how they move around Mecca, just like particles orientate themselves around a magnet. So, there was a very deep sense of betrayal of humanity that I experienced firsthand. And it's not saying that everyone will experience that same level, but um, man, it was tough because I wanted to open up and discuss these things and talk about these things to people. And, you know, there's not a lot of people willing to go outside of their own faith, not willing to go outside of their own belief systems, not willing to have an open and honest discussion. There's the Jehovah's Witnesses who come and knock on your door. There's the Mormons, and there's all kinds of different religions out there. And even if you look at the Jehovah's Witness, their founder, the gravesite is a pyramid. So Freemasonry is another one of those things. And the Vatican has been long accused of hiding all kinds of secrets, but the symbolism is there, right? We go into almost all major cities in this country, and if you go to the older parts, you will find scattered buildings with all kinds of Masonic symbolism, Freemasonry. You can find it everywhere, and there are a lot of people who think that we didn't build this country. Some of it was already here, and we basically inherited it. There was also in the early 1800s, excuse me, orphan trains, which was mass migration coming into this country. So if you wanted to reset a civilization and you wanted to bring in and brainwash generations of people to be factory workers, to be the army for the nation, then I can't think of what better way than to basically bring your own orphans to the country. Many of the schools back then, there was also a lot of insane asylums where people who couldn't be controlled ended up in insane asylums. People with gifts, often because they couldn't be understood, ended up in insane asylums. So the orphan trains was a very interesting thing when I look back into that. And you start to realize that much of our modern history is fabricated, it's fake, it's make believe. I mean, we had in the early 1900s, the Rockefellers came in, revamped the whole school system, revamped the medical system. If you didn't um, meet certain criteria, you would have your license pulled because they came in, set up all these um, institutions where you get certificates, right? This is where we get the whole certificate of um, being qualified for something. And if you don't have that qualification, you just don't get treated the same. So if the doctors didn't go along with these new pharmaceutical drugs, then they, out the door you go, we'll get someone else who will, because we have brought our own um, mass population to be brainwashed into believing a lot of these things. When you look at the word Israel, Isis, Ra, and El, all the angels are Angel, Michael, Raphael. There's a El on the end of all the angels, and these are different angles of light, different angles of understanding, and they're separated by degrees. So 33. So there it goes, guys. The reason I started the practice was very deeply personal for me. And along the way, I've opened up, I've shared a lot with all of you, the enlightenment aspects of it. And, you know, I wouldn't be sitting here without it, because it's so strange now when I think back to a time before I recorded my first video, how shy and timid I was at hearing my own voice. I didn't even like myself. That's brutal honesty, right? I definitely went through that phase where I started to become my own best friend, because I realized that if the people closest to me, even if it was unintentional, could betray me over my eternal life, then I couldn't trust anyone. And around that time, around the early stages of celibacy, there were a lot of stuff going on. There were people using fake accounts. There were people doing underhanded tactics, because I was starting to speak out about a lot of stuff. And a lot of it was intimidation tactics. The intimidation was supposed to make me feel fearful, not to speak up. But again, I remind everyone out there watching, I am a fearless man of God, not a man who is in fear of God. I do not fear God. Why would I fear God? That doesn't make any sense. I understand something that is below the surface, and there's no need for me to fight or argue with it. I just understand it for what it is, that is on the outside of me. And Romans 12:2 was something that really stuck with me during this time, because, you know, being isolated is a very life-changing experience, because it really tests you in ways that you can't even imagine, right? We think about Moses being in the desert for 40 days. Who did he talk to? Who did he argue with? I mean, who do you talk to when you're alone? If you're mad at the world, if you don't love yourself, if you blame everything out there for all of your problems, and you find yourself alone with no one to talk to, no one to respond to you, who do you talk to? Who do you argue with? Do you argue with yourself? So isolation has this effect on the psychological aspect of the brain that is, it either makes people or it makes them more crazy. And for some, indeed, it does drive them more crazy. For others, it is a time for them to finally grow. And sometimes they say God will isolate you on purpose because he has a plan for you. But again, him. But Mother Nature, we call it Mother, right? Nature, a creative force. And we often associate creativity with the feminine aspect. So the word earth and the word heart are spelled using the exact same amount of letters. We just move the H to the back and we get the word earth. So the heart, right, is our earth. It is our mother home. Home is where the heart is. The sun above, through the awareness, is able to shine things into the unconscious and make it conscious, right? To shine the light on something. Very interesting things happen when you spend a lot of time alone and it's just you, and you start to find the answers that people were not willing to open up and discuss with you. So the practice for me had a lot to do with equal give and take, reciprocity, but also during that time, I learned to balance the inner aspects of masculine and feminine within myself, I also learned to admit to myself, right? Because this, while ago, spoke of the cathode being the point of emission. And I remind myself in this moment that when I wrote about taking away one of her senses, and this is very symbolic, that emissions were the ticket to freedom. I admit that I have this fear within me. And because I admit it, I call it by name, and it can no longer stay with me because I am calling it by name. I'm not describing it, I'm actually calling it. Some people believe in demons, and other people will say demons is just a meaning for negative thoughts, bad thoughts about oneself. So you can take that with a grain of salt, but the experience of semen retention changed my life in so many ways. I don't have any fear about saying what I'm saying now in front of the camera. And yeah, I understand how seeds of doubt and fear get planted in someone else's head. But again, that betrayal feeling, because to be honest, most religion works on the law of attraction, where one or two or more gather, other people start to assign value and meaning and purpose to something. Well, isn't that church where two gather, a fellowship may form? So, shared beliefs and the magnetism of feelings, right? Because feelings are magnetic and thoughts are electric. So, cathode having to do with electricity, sunlight being a form of energy, and an electromagnetic plasma emitting light, and the understanding of how that same very light goes into the black hole of the eyeballs. There is literally the kingdom within is everything out there and everything in here. Like the mirror of the outside world and the inside world is definitely there. You can even acknowledge the paradox of many of these things and still can't escape the matrix. So, guys, it can change your life. It can help balance your nervous system, help get your chemistry, your inner chemistry right, your inner atmosphere, make you more brave, make you more courageous. But the most revealing part about all of this is when you become magnetic, you move like the dancer who's no longer thinking about the dance, they have become one with it. And that is the most magnetic form of being that one can be, just like a flower blossoming without being apologetic, a force of nature. And that comes from mother. That doesn't come from man-made religion. It doesn't come from he, doesn't come from him. It comes from Mother Nature working in harmony with the sun to illuminate it, to show it, to reveal it, to become it, and be it. And with that, guys, I'll see you on the next one.